The Senate will come to order. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move a call to the Senate.
A call of the Senate has been moved and properly sustained. Will the sergeants please close the doors, allow no senators to leave, and return all those who are absent?
Bridges. Buckner. Coleman. Cook.
I'm just going to mark.
Yep. Quorum. Danielson. Donovan. Fenberg. Fields. Gardner. Janal. Gonzalez. Yeah. No, she was not here. Hanson. Heisey. Holbert. Hawkins Lewis. Kirkmeyer. Colker. Lee. Liston. Lundeen. Marino. Patterson. Priola. Rankin. Rodriguez. Scott. Here. Simpson. Smallwood. I have to call him again, right? Yeah. Sonnenberg. Story. Winter. Woodward. Zenzinger. Just start over with those.
Yeah, just put anyone that's here, so Cook.
Okay. Cook. Yeah. Quorum. Fields. Janal. Kirkmeyer. Rankin. I don't think any of the rest are here. Do I just wait now? Gonzalez, Lundeen. Triola.
So we're gonna do consent first. And then bring up the long.
Smallwood. Lundin.
Will the sergeants please get Senator Sonnenberg, Senator Winter, Senator Zenzinger, and Senator Gonzalez?
Put them in the jail cell.
Hey, center field.
Sonnenberg. Gonzalez.
There you are.
You're gonna remove the two bills from consent?
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the call be raised.
The motion is to raise the call. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the call is raised. Message from the House.
April 8th, the Health has passed on third reading and transmitted to advisory statutes, House Bill 1235, 1116, 1133, and 1173. The House has passed on third reading and returns here with Senate Bill 145. The House has passed on third reading and transmitted to advisory statutes, House Bill 1236, 1139, 1095, 1084, 1099, 1136, 1006, 1181, 1207, 1224, as amended, printed House Journal, April 7, 2021.
General order, second reading of bills. Mr. Majority Leader.
Is he doing, are you chairing the count?
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, there was a request to remove Senate Bill 208, Senate Bill 225, and House Bill 1018 from the general order second reading of bills consent calendar.
The request is that House Bill 1018, Senate Bill 225, and Senate Bill 208 be removed from the general order second reading of bills consent calendar. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Also, I move House Bill 1018 lay over to April 12th.
The motion is to lay over House Bill 1018 until 4/12/21 and retain its place on the calendar. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and that motion is adopted. General order, second reading of bills. Consent calendar. Senator Bridges.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate resolve itself to the Committee of the Whole for the consideration of general order, second reading of bills, consent calendar.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. The Senate resolve itself to the Committee of the Whole for consideration of general order, second reading of bills, consent calendar. Senator Bridges will take the chair.
The committee will come to order, and the court rule is not relaxed. Will the clerk please read the title of all the bills in the general order, second reading bills consent calendar?
Senate Bill 206 by Senators Moreno and Representative McCluskey concerning the continuous appropriation of money in the Educator Licensure Cash Fund. Senate Bill 207 by Senators Moreno and Rankin and Representative Herard concerning the transfer of $100 million from the marijuana cash tax fund to the public school capital construction assistance funds and in connection with making an appropriation. Senate Bill 209 by Senator Rankin and Representative McCluskey concerning the transfer to the general fund of the balances from appealed cash funds. Senate Bill 210 by Senators Hansen and Representative Ransom concerning expanding the definition of electronic monitoring services to include remote supports for the home and community-based services waiver for the elderly, blind, and disabled. Senate Bill 212 by Senators Moreno and Representative McCluskey concerning aligning primary care payments with the Colorado Medical Assistance Act to maximize federal funds and in connection therewith identifying anticipated federal funds. Senate Bill 213 by Senators Moreno and Representative McCluskey concerning the increased money received due to the Federal Families vs. Coronavirus Response Act and in connection therewith making and reducing appropriations. Senate Bill 214 by Senators Hansen and Representative McCluskey concerning state payments to licensed hospice facilities for residential care provided to certain persons enrolled in the medical assistance program and in connection therewith making an appropriation. Senate Bill 216 by Senators Rankin and Representative Herod concerning the Colorado Commission for the Deaf, Hard of Hearing, and Deaf Blind, and in connection therewith providing auxiliary services in rural areas of the state for persons who are deaf, hard of hearing, or deaf blind, and removing the requirement that not-for-profit entity must be a community-based organization to be eligible to apply for the Commissioner for grant money. Senate Bill 217 by Senators Hansen and Rankin and Representative Herod and McCluskey concerning adjusting the contract for a market rate study of provider rates for the Colorado Child Care Assistance Program from annually to every 3 years. Senate Bill 220 by Senators Hansen, Rankin, and Representative Herard concerning the stabilization of revenue in the severance tax operation fund by returning money that was transferred to the Natural Resources and Energy Grant programs. Senate Bill 221 by Senators Hansen and Rankin and Representative McCluskey concerning projects under the Forest Restoration and Wildlife Risk Mitigation Grant Program. Senate Bill 226 by Senator Moreno and Representative McCluskey concerning an increase in the general fund reserve. Senate Bill 227 by Senator Moreno, Rankin, and Representative Ransom concerning the state emergency reserve and in connection therewith designating the state emergency reserve for the year 2021-22 state fiscal year, creating the state emergency reserve cash fund and requiring reimbursements for expenditures from a fund that is designated part of the state emergency reserve to be returned to the fund. House Bill 1177 by Representative Valdez D. and Lynch and Senators Moreno and Woodward concerning the inclusion of use tax exemptions for certain existing sales tax exemptions in order to make the exemptions compatible with the fundamental principles of sales and use tax. House Bill 1152 by Representatives Valdez D. and Lynch and Senators Cookman and Zanzinger concerning the repeal of statutes related to the obsolete Capitol Dome Restoration Fund. House Bill 1154 by Representatives Lynch and Valdez and Senators Moreno concerning the elimination of obsolete provisions of the Child Care Contribution State Income Tax Credit.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move for the adoption of all the bills on the consent calendar and their associated committee reports, which includes Senate Bills 206, 207, 209, 210, 212, 213, 214, 216, 217, along with the Appropriations Committee report 220, 221, 226, 227, House Bill 1177, 1152, and 1154.
You sure that's all? Is there any discussion of the committee reports? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the adoption of all the committee reports in the general order, second reading of bills, consent calendar. All those in favor say aye. All opposed, no. Okay, the ayes still have it. The committee reports are adopted. Appreciate the enthusiasm. How about discussion on the bills on the consent calendar? Seeing no discussion, the motion before the body is the adoption of all the bills in the general order, second reading of bills, consent calendar. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Enthusiastic ayes have it. Bills are adopted. Majority Leader Fenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move the committee rise and report.
The motion is for a committee to rise and report. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Ayes have it. Committee will rise and report.
The Senate will come to order. Senator Bridges.
Thank you, Mr. President. The committee has had a number of bills under consideration. The clerk, please read the report.
Mr. President, your committee of the whole makes, lead to report has had in consideration the following attached bills being the second reading thereof and makes the following recommendations thereon. Senate Bills 206, 207, 209, 210, 212, 213, 214, 216, 217 as amended, 220, 221, 226, 227. Passed on second reading in order and engrossed and placed in the calendar for third reading and final passage. House Bills 1177, 1152, and 1154. Passed on second reading in order revised and placed in the calendar for third reading and final passage.
Senator Bridges.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the report.
The motion is for the adoption of the committee of the whole report. Are there any no votes? With a vote of 35 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, and 0 excused, committee of the whole report is adopted. Senate Bill 206, Senate Bill 207, Senate Bill 209, Senate Bill 210, Senate Bill 212, Senate Bill 213, Senate Bill 214, Senate Bill 216, Senate Bill 217, as amended, Senate Bill 220, Senate Bill 221, Senate Bill 226, and Senate Bill 227. Passed on second reading, ordered engrossed and placed on the calendar for third reading and final passage. House Bill 1177, House Bill 1152, House Bill 1154. Passed on second reading, ordered revised and placed on the calendar for third reading and final passage. General order, second reading of bills. Senator Bridges.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate resolve itself, the committee of the whole, for consideration of general order, second reading of bills, and the budget.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes having the motion is adopted. The Senate resolve itself, the committee of the whole, for consideration of general order, second reading of bills, and Senator Bridges will take the chair.
The committee will come to order, and the coat rule is relaxed. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move the committee proceed out of order to take up Senate Bill 205.
Motion before the body is proceed out of order and take up Senate Bill 205. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Ayes have it. We'll take up 205. To the bill. Will the clerk please read the title to Senate Bill 205?
Senate Bill 205 by Senator Moreno and Representative McCluskey concerning the provision for payment of the expenses of the executive, legislative, and judicial departments of the state of Colorado and its agencies and institutions for and during the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2021, except as otherwise noted.
Senator Moreno.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move Senate Bill 205.
Seeing no discussion, the question, just kidding. Go ahead, Senator Moreno.
Committee, this is the fiscal year 21-22 long bill. I'll reserve most of my comments for third reading because I know there are a variety of amendments and a variety of changes that will be made to this bill. But just broadly, colleagues, I think the Budget Committee, the General Assembly have been through one of the craziest swings in budgeting that I have ever seen, that I think many of us have ever seen. A year ago, we were in a position of having to cut $3 billion from the state budget. Given subsequent economic forecasts and revenue forecasts, it turns out that we actually had more resources than we expected. I do want to exercise some caution, however, because I can't emphasize enough the degree to which those resources are one-time. They come from a better year than expected in fiscal year 1920. And the way our budget works is that if those dollars are unallocated, they remain in the general fund reserve and they carry over year to year until they're allocated. Fiscal year 21-22 would not work, the balancing would not work were it not for those one-time funds. Because the reality is, colleagues, that the spending package that we have put forward for your consideration is more than the anticipated revenues that we're expected to bring in next year. The reason this budget is balanced is because we are drawing upon those one-time resources to fill the gap next year. Going forward, the economic and revenue forecasts predict that we will be in a place where we can sustain the level of expenditures that we have proposed in fiscal year 21-22. But that gap remains in the next budget year. And we shouldn't take that lightly because there are so many things that the federal government has done that are allowing us to balance. The extension of the federal public health emergency declaration, which has meant that we receive an increased 6.2% federal match for Medicaid, that has allowed us to balance. That declaration will expire in December of this year, and significant general fund resources will be needed to meet our obligation to the traditional match levels for Medicaid. So I just want to make sure that those risks are known, that there is good news, there are additional resources, but I would exercise caution. And I would hope that we would all make sound fiscal decisions that I think are represented in this budget. Things like paying off COP debt early. Things like prepaying our state obligation and commitment to PARA. Things like paying our commitment to controlled maintenance early. All of these things will put us in a better fiscal position to manage the uncertainty going forward. On top of a 13.5% reserve, higher than I've seen in my time at the Capitol, but necessary given the economic conditions that are out there and given the state, I would say the fragility of the budget as it stands today. So colleagues, I look forward to the discussion. I want to thank the incredible Joint Budget Committee staff, as well as, honestly, an incredible committee. People that have worked for 5 months to put this product together for your consideration. It's been a labor of love. It has been the most challenging environment for budgeting that I've ever seen, going from one extreme to another. But I think what you have before you today is a responsible budget and one that will allow us to manage that uncertainty going forward.
Senator Rankin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just want to take a minute to talk about the process leading up to this, 5 months. But really it goes back to earlier than this time last year. Incredible staff. And it's a bipartisan process, and I want to thank the majority party and Chairman Marino and the other members of the committee for a very bipartisan process. We, of course, don't agree on everything. That's our role. But this budget is the product of a lot of hard work and discussion among the members in trying to restore the significant cuts that we did last year, but also to look forward. And I want to emphasize that, our work is really not over. It's really just starting. We're going to deal with $800 million of stimulus. We have to deal with, looks like $4 billion of federal funds and at least maybe the first of two bills. So we have a lot of budget work to do. I think we have constructed this budget in light of, in thinking about that work yet to come. But I just wanted to emphasize that. And once again, thank our Director Campman and our wonderful staff. Many of our staff were new last year and 2 more this year. And to come into this budget process in the middle of that and do the job they've done is just absolutely remarkable. So thanks to everybody who worked on it.
And thank you, Senator. Senator Hansen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And colleagues, just a couple of extra comments to keep in mind as we head into this very important debate today. The long bill, as was mentioned, represents about 5 months of continuous work on 1,000+ line items on nearly $35 billion in spending. We present to you a work product, a long bill that we think is going to help Colorado recover stronger than ever, recover quickly, and invest in the most important pieces of our economy and, most importantly, the great citizens and students of the state of Colorado. I want us all to keep in mind, though, that we have crafted a budget with significant reserves for exactly the reasons that Chairman Moreno mentioned. We have significant uncertainty in front of us. We need to make sure that we have a reserve that is up to that task. We've set it at 13.5%. Many of the amendments we're going to discuss today would have a direct impact on that reserve. Please keep that in mind as we move forward on this debate. The other important piece of this puzzle is significant federal dollars coming to the state of Colorado. Some are going directly to school districts. Some are going directly to local governments, city governments, county governments. $3.9 billion is coming directly to the state. So we've tried to craft a budget that complements that package, that doesn't overlap, that uses those federal dollars carefully and the state dollars carefully. Please keep that in mind as we move through this debate. I want to thank my colleagues, I want to thank the JBC staff, and I look forward to the debate on the long bill.
Thank you, Senator. There is. To the bill, Senator Lundin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to pause and thank the members of the Joint Budget Committee. It is an arduous task. It is 5 months of blood, sweat, and tears. And I want to point out that it started with last session's budget. That was probably more tears, blood, tears, sweat, tears, and tears than we have seen before. The reality is it's a difficult circumstance. The Joint Budget Committee has done marvelous, amazing work. And at the same time, the incredibly important work that those 6 members of the General Assembly bring to us is not the end point. It is the starting point of the responsibility of the Colorado General Assembly. 100 members gathered together to define what we will spend the next several hours talking about, the priorities as we understand them from the people of Colorado. We have an interesting circumstance in front of us. We've arrived here through difficult circumstances, toil, and effort. And we have an historic reserve. The 30-year average of reserves that the state of Colorado has held is about 3%. And you'll be asked on one of the orbital bills later today to vote for a 15% reserve. That's an enormous reserve, especially in the context of history. The question is money in a bank account the place where we should put that money? Or is it money on projects that will return economic activity to the people of Colorado, that will restore jobs, that will help students catch up from the ground that they have lost during the incredibly challenging time for them and their families of the pandemic? The question is that we will be debating today as we enter into this starting point of the budget conversation before the entire General Assembly one of priorities. I thank the members of the Joint Budget Committee for the incredible work and the framing they have given us to work from. And I challenge, with I hope what is a clarion call to my colleagues in this chamber and across the hall in the other chamber, to bring all the voices of this General Assembly, and behind them, all the voices of the people of Colorado, into the shaping of the priorities of how we choose to spend the money we have before us. The footnote that goes to all of this, we have seen 2 rounds of federal dollars flowing into this state. Enormous amounts of money, more than we've ever seen before. And there is yet one more round flowing behind that. The question is, the challenge is, it comes the way Washington, D.C. would have us spend it. We can only spend and direct the priorities with the money that we have before us, the money we will be discussing today. And my call to you, my colleagues, is we should be putting the money we have access and control over, not the money that may come from D.C. with strings attached to it, to work. We need to pick the priorities today. We need to help people get back to their jobs and businesses back on their feet. We need to help students who have fallen behind catch up. And we need to not let the crisis of the pandemic push the other crises that we have in Colorado, specifically the roads and bridges of Colorado. We must not let that crisis be pushed aside. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. It's good to know you're a Keynesian. Colleagues, we have packets at each of our desks. We have seen the amendments, so rather than having amendments handed to the staff up here, we'll just go through the amendment packet starting with 1. So please keep an eye on where we are in the packet and be ready when your number is called. If you're not ready, we'll move on to the next person who is ready, and we'll come back to you later if you would like us to do that. So, that being said, there is an amendment at the desk. Will the clerk please read amendment L00, well, will the clerk please read amendment 1 to the budget?
So do I move amendment 1?
Amendment J016 of Senate Bill 205.
Senator Kirkmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move amendment 1, or J016.
Let's just refer to the amendments by their number in the packet. That's the easiest thing. Note for everybody.
All right,
Moving
move
amendment
amendment
1 to the amendment. Thank you, Senator Kirkmeyer.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Amendment 1, I just want you to know it's my first time here. The First Amendment, and I was given some really good advice by my colleagues, and they told me that I should tell you that it's for the children. Right? Sorry. It probably does create jobs. But, so here we go. Amendment 1
Jobs and kids.
is very simple. It currently, our DOC inmate per diem that we pay to counties for housing our inmates is $59.42. Amendment 1 requests that we change that and up it to $80 per the $80 would be the per diem. Members, over the past year, the state has used COVID as a reason to leave DOC inmates in county jails. It has exacerbated the issues that county jails have had and sheriffs have had to do in dealing with COVID and separating the inmate population, again, because of COVID. And it has exacerbated cost and time for the sheriff's office. It is literally, we have backed up DOC inmates in county jails at a huge cost to counties. For example, in Weld County, at one point during COVID, during the last year, 1/4, 25% of the inmates in the county jail were DOC inmates. So as I stated, the state reimburses currently $59.42 per day. In Weld County, the cost is $108. This is a huge shift to counties, a huge cost shift to counties, a huge unfunded mandate. What I think is going to exacerbate this problem is in our budget in the long bill, where corrections on page 20 has asked to decrease 110 FTE in corrections, and it's a decrease of $17.4 million. The 110 FTE that they're decreasing, we learned, is mostly correctional officers. I think which will further exacerbate this problem is on page 82, the Judicial Department is asking to restore the courts and probation staff, adding 130.5 FTE. And because of an anticipated rise in caseload, they're also adding an additional 16.6 magistrates, again, to help address an expected trial backlog. I think we're looking to really slam our counties and our county jails, and that they'll be housing a lot of DOC inmates. But further, I just want to remind you all, even though I was not here, some of you were here. In 2018, 1132 passed, and it required that counties report to the General Assembly the cost of housing DOC inmates. And in a memo to the JBC from JBC staff, they also reminded the JBC that the General Assembly must consider this information when establishing the DOC reimbursement. At that point, they were using a determination of weighted average from a survey that they had done in 2017, that the average cost in 2017 was $81.65. The JBC staff went on further to recommend that they use the $81.65 as a targeted per diem that should increase over time over the next decade due to inflation. If you look at the charts that the JBC staff offered to the JBC back in 2018, the per diem in 2021 should actually be $82. Again, this amendment is just requesting that we get caught up, we do what was required in 1132, and that we increase the per diem from $59.42 to $80 for DOC inmates. Thank you.
Further discussion, Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would oppose this amendment and urge my colleagues to oppose it. It's the jails have differential occupancy costs throughout the state, and to come up with one number is a bit of a blunderbuss, and it may not, or a broadsword approach, it may overcompensate some, undercompensate some others. I would say the more nuanced approach to this issue would be to ask for a study of the costs of the jails throughout the state of Colorado, and then we can respond appropriately. We're also in sort of a unique time right now because the Department of Corrections has closed its front door in order to reduce exposure to COVID. And that will alter shortly as we move out of this pandemic with vaccines and healthier climates. DOC would take, I think there's somewhere around 1,000, 1,200 people that are in the backlog in the county jails, and they'll be moved out. We do need to come to an accord on how much to spend, but let's do it by study as opposed to just one number for every jail. Thank you.
Fantastic use of blunderbuss. Senator Kirkmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not opposed to having yet another study, but I would just remind you all that a study was created in 2017 that said the average weighted cost of a DOC inmate in our county jails is $81.64 or something of that nature, but essentially $81. We did a study. We figured out what the average cost was in 2017. In 2018, y'all passed 1132, which said you're supposed to take that study into consideration. You're supposed to take into the cost of what it costs for inmates in county jails, that you have to take that under consideration. At that time, JBC staff recommended that you use the $81.65 as a weighted average, and that you look at it and increase it based on inflation over a decade period of time to get caught up, what we've been cost shifting to counties, and get caught up. By 2027, we're supposed to be at $104 per diem. Right now, the chart shows that we should be at $82 per diem. I'm simply asking that you get caught up, that we get caught up, and that we don't shift our costs to counties.
Senator Cook.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know the code rule was relaxed. I hope you relax the apron rule as well. I rise in support of this amendment. The state has an obligation to pick up their inmates within 3 days. State inmates within 3 days. And if they don't, they are supposed to pay for the costs after 3 days. Well, unfortunately, the state DOC isn't picking up those inmates, and they're burdening the county jails with their inmates and making the counties fund it. This is a cost shift. The $9 that they currently pay is nowhere near the expense that the counties are incurring. There's medical costs, which are huge in county jails, food costs. There are a number of costs. The medical ones are the biggest. It's like a mini city. It's a of what's going on. We have people with AIDS in the jail. We have people that need dialysis, and it's a huge cost. And they're just shifting that to the counties and not doing their share. If we're going to keep the state inmates in county jails, the state needs to pay for it. And I agree with the last speaker. There has been studies. It's been studied to death, and the studies show that the state is not paying their share. $80 is more than reasonable to start getting caught up. So I'd ask for an aye vote on this amendment.
Senator Zenzinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that the former speaker's comments should be ruled out of order because he is wearing an apron. No, just kidding.
All those in favor, just kidding. Senator Corm.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about this because this is a huge issue in Southwest Colorado. Got a call from my sheriff in Montezuma County. Their jail was completely full, had been holding inmates for 30 days or more, and new arrests were having to be taken to a neighboring county and paying a fee there. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe a few years ago we had a situation where some of the counties, I believe it was Jefferson County, if I am correct, filed a lawsuit against the corrections, and they are not paying each and every county the same amount. So I'm going to have to go back and double check that, but I know that was the case at that time. So this is a huge impact in my district. Archuleta County, a couple years ago, their jail was condemned, and so they're having to haul all their inmates to La Plata County right now. So don't think the new jail is ready yet. So it's a huge problem in Southwest Colorado, and it's a huge cost to those counties. Fair is fair.
Senator Fields.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm looking here at a study that was done in 2017, and I believe I was on this interim committee that was looking at the overcrowding of county jails. And when I look at the summary, I see that there's a lot of variation in reference to capacity in some of these jails, and also as it relates to the jail costs. So I'm just going to speak to Arapahoe County, which I represent. And in this study, Arapahoe County indicated in 2017 that their average daily cost was $89.87. However, back then, the reimbursement rate, it's somewhere, I think it was like 58, or maybe, I think they got a $2 increase. The reimbursement rate, I'm not seeing it right now, but there wasn't parity in reference to the costs that Arapahoe County Jail is having to dispense as it relates to the average cost compared to their reimbursement rate. And it varies. Like if you're in Clear Creek, they're saying it's $100 a day. Eagle County, it's $50. In El Paso County, it's $88. In Larimer County, it's $119. So the cost does vary. And I just think that this is a solution that at some point we need to get our arms around as it relates to making sure that there's equity and parity as it relates to reimbursing our county jails.
Senator Moreno.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And colleagues, I don't dispute anything that's been said. Clearly, we are behind in our payments to county jails. I would just note that the payment to county jails is actually more than the per diem payment to private prisons. Similar functions, but we pay county jails more, even though private prisons house offenders for a much longer period of time than our county jails do. There have been studies, and what was referenced by the senator from Arapahoe County is what should give us pause. That variability of cost, those wide swings in what it costs to house an offender at certain county jails versus others. I'm not going to say that our reimbursement rate for county jails is sufficient. I don't believe it is. But I do think we have to solve for that variability issue before we just dump more money into the issue.
Senator Kirkmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I don't disagree that we don't need to look at this again and find out what's going on and do a survey. Counties for the last 4 or 5 years have been reporting their costs to the General Assembly as required. But what we do know is, even in 2017, from that survey, the average weighted cost for a DOC inmate, $81.65. And today, we are only at $59.42. This General Assembly promised through 181132 that we would increase that per diem rate over a decade of time with inflation rates to get to $104. Where we're supposed to be at is $82. What this simply is requesting is keep our promise. Quit cost shifting to counties, quit with the unfunded mandates, and quit thinking that counties are the place where you should be backlogging, we should be backlogging DOC inmates. If we want to do another study, let's do another study, and let's find out what the number really is.
Seeing no further discussion.
Oh, and I'm sorry, and I ask for an aye vote on Amendment 1. Thank you.
An aye vote has been requested by the author of Amendment 1. The question before the body is the adoption of Amendment 1. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those no? No. Noes have it. That amendment is lost. Will the clerk please read Amendment 2?
Amendment 2.
Senator Zenzinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move Amendment 2.
To the amendment.
Members, what this amendment does is it takes $10 million from the state education fund and it puts it towards the line item for the categorical funding for special education. I will let my co-sponsor here talk a little bit about the reason behind this, and then I will follow up with some concluding remarks.
Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, I do ask your support for Amendment 2, J007. When we look at students who qualify for special education funding, there are 2 tiers of disability. Tier A includes more minor disabilities like dyslexia. And I've shared here before, I'm dyslexic. My elementary school years were a real struggle. I heard over and over again, you have such potential if you'll just focus and try harder. And as a dyslexic, the harder you focus, the more confusing things become visually. On those Tier A students, we are obligated, we should be funding $1,250 per student. For the students in the second tier, those are students who are blind, who are deaf, who have autism, major brain trauma.
that's more significant than dyslexia. There are ways that I found to learn, and there wasn't always focusing on reading. But we're supposed to be funding the students in Tier B, those more significant disabilities, with an additional $6,000 per student for a total of $7,250. We don't do that. Right now, we fund about 43% of what we should be funding. And with this additional $10 million, we could get up to 50.9, almost 51%, a little more than half of what we're supposed to be doing for those students. So this isn't something that I want to say that JBC overlooked. This is something that I want to join my colleague in saying we're not doing what we're supposed to do. We would be doing just a little more than half of what we're supposed to do to help those students who need it the most. Now, we may hear argument that this should be done in the School Finance Act. Okay, let's go ahead and make the allocation now. Let's go ahead and say, yes, we'll live up to almost 51% of what we should be doing for those students who need our help the most. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Zenzinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as many of you know, this is an area, a real passion of mine. Prior to the 2019 School Finance Act, we were actually funding our special education students at 31%. And we put in a historic infusion of money in order to bump us up to 43.8. It was historic because it was almost doubling what we were doing. However, it doesn't even compare to the cost of what it actually costs to support students in special education, because the real cost of special education is just an astronomical number that we are not even beginning to touch on. So what this amendment does is a couple of things. We knew that the pandemic has had a disproportionate effect on our students with disabilities. Back during May of 2020, there was a survey that was conducted by NPR that showed that at that point in May, about 4 in 10 parents of special education students said that they were not receiving any support at all. So that's 39% of our students. Also, in addition to that, just 1 in 5, so 20%, said that they were receiving all of the services that they were entitled to. 35% report that their children are doing little to no remote learning, compared with 17% of their general education peers. And then here is the real kicker. 40% of parents of special needs children were concerned about their children's mental health, compared to 23% of parents of other children. There was a study that was actually done by Ed Research for Recovery that focused in on the necessary academic supports for students with disabilities. And this was prior to the pandemic. That students with disabilities are one of the student populations likely to have regressed the most during COVID-related distance learning. The single most important service that schools provide for students with disabilities is that additional intervention, the time that is devoted to student-specific areas of need. There was a really great article written by the Colorado Sun that looked at an in-depth portrait of learning loss and acceleration and its impact to students with disabilities. So while the disruptions to public education from the COVID-19 pandemic were unprecedented, it's really upon us as policymakers to look to what we can do to figure out how we're going to best address it. Prior to the pandemic, we knew that the best practices for helping students with disabilities is to provide intensive tutoring, to increase their instructional time, to prioritize their learning and acceleration, and avoid over-remediation. Those were the best practices prior to the pandemic. But how do we begin to do that if we're only funding special education right now at 43.8%? So this is a very modest amount of money that we are requesting. This $10 million will get us up to 50.9%. How much would it take to get us to 100%? Well, that amount is $79,486,459.53. I'm not asking for 79 million, I'm asking for 10. I'm not asking to get to 100 because this is categorical funding. Categorical funding you have to carry forward from year to year to year, cannot go down. I'm saying, don't these students deserve to be at least 50% of what we say we want to support them? So I ask for an I vote.
I'm curious about the 53%. Seeing no, before you begin, Senator Moreno, two very important announcements. First, the first round of food is ready for those of you who would like to go eat. So grab your brats, your burgers, and enjoy. Second important announcement, the coat rule is relaxed for all in the room. Apparently, I can relax it for everyone except for Alex Burness. He's got to keep it on. But everyone else, you're welcome to take your, you can too, Alex. Senator Moreno.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think there's been a lot of good information that's been provided through the course of the explanation of this amendment. Just a couple of other things. Just want to make sure folks understand the $10 million that's in question would not be from the general fund. It's actually from the state education fund, which is the savings account for K through 12 education. The senator from Arvada mentioned that there was a fairly substantial increase for this program just a couple of years ago. So just another point of information for context. And then lastly, just want to make sure it's not without note, again, pursuant to the Constitution, categorical programs can never be decreased. So once you build the base, you have to maintain that base going forward, plus you have to adjust for inflation for all of those categorical programs. Because of that adjustment for inflation, this particular categorical will be receiving about close to $4 million in additional funding. Again, just points of information for you to consider in your deliberations.
Senator Zenzinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do appreciate the background and the understanding of what the purpose of the state ed fund is for. I do want to note that we have some orbital bills that will be accommodating or accompanying the budget today that will be transferring a large amount of money from the general fund to the state ed fund with a target of having the state ed fund land at $460 million. So I think that this is the appropriate place in order to take this funding, the 10 million, that would land us at 450 million in the state ed fund when all is said and done, if that orbital bill passes. And the reason why we're only asking for 10 million and not 79 million is because we do have to carry it forward. But I think carrying forward half of what we are obligated to spend for our special education students is pretty modest, and I would ask for an aye vote.
Seeing no further discussion, the question before us is the adoption of Amendment 2. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Ayes have it. That amendment is adopted. Again, colleagues, there are burgers and brats available for your enjoyment here at the front. Please have lunch, be merry. We're on to Amendment 3. Will the clerk please read Amendment 3?
Amendment 3.
Senator Lundeen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I move Amendment 3, also known as J035.
To the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Along with my colleague from the almost as pretty as Monument area, Colorado, we would like to say good step on that last amendment, a step in the right direction, an acknowledgement that students are struggling in this particular time, and we need to focus on those elements that are critically important to our budget priorities. I'll let my colleague speak for a moment, and then I'll back clean up.
Senator Woodward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my colleague and I took a look at what we could do today, knowing that our students are so far behind after taking a year off, after losing a year of education. And it's clear what the school districts, what the teachers are telling us is that we have to catch up quick. Summer school and tutoring are one of the ways that we can impact those students immediately. So it's important that that we put our money where our mouth is and put our kids as a priority within this budget. And even though this is coming a little bit late, JBC did not get a chance to incorporate this tutoring enough into their budget. We're putting this amendment forward so that we can put some money where our mouth is.
Back to Senator Lundin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So what this amendment does is it makes an ask that's actually a better deal than the last ask. It's going to serve more students. It's going to serve the K through 3 population. It uses existing programs, a competitive grant program that already exists under the READ Act. It provides flexibility for all 178 districts, all the local education providers, that would be charter schools, boards of cooperative education, and others, to apply the $60 million that we're asking for here to that most important element in a child's educational professional experience, and that is learning how to read. If you don't learn how to read, your entire educational experience is going to be a challenge. And we have students today, because of the pandemic, because of the circumstance, who have lost significant ground, who are struggling today to in fact get to that reading gateway and getting through it. This amendment would help address that. It would use existing structures. It's efficient, it's smart, per student, return on investment. This is a great place to put your money. Now, there's $50 million already set aside for all of us legislators. And I think we ought to put the legislators aside and think about the students at this point. This particular ask is a little more than that $50 million, but even if we only spent money making sure students caught up, it would be well spent money in my opinion. I urge your support of Amendment L035, also known as Amendment 3.
Senator Rankin.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I believe I can urge support for the intent of this spending. You know, I would think the long bill might not be the right place to do it, but this is about reading. This is about the bill that you all voted for unanimously, those who were here in both the House and the Senate 2 years ago. That program set up both a per pupil payment based on students with significant reading disabilities and a grant program. The grant program has been extremely successful. We now have 12,000 teachers signed up being trained in the science of reading. So this is also about tutoring. It's about catching up students. So whether or not, you know, and I don't think the long bill is the right place to do this, so I don't recommend it. Whether or not we put a long bill amendment of $60 million, you know, there are other places that we should consider doing this, the federal stimulus and the state stimulus. So I would suggest that this is a great idea. We need to do it. Let's do it in one of the other bills. So good amendment, vote no.
Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do rise in support of the amendment. We have talked about getting kids back to school. And as we celebrate a little spring and the leaves popping out on the trees, getting our kids back to school is a great goal, but that'll be for a few weeks, a month, maybe a little bit more, and then the summer break will occur. And at least in our caucus, we've had a discussion about 4 districts, 4 schools, 4 charter schools that want to offer maybe something more along the lines of a summer semester, that we ought to be open to having that conversation, and this amendment would go a long way to helping that happen. We're not a central top-down control kind of state. We're a local control state. There's 178 school districts. There are charter schools in those districts that are chartered by the district. There's charter schools that are chartered at the state level. But if a school, if a district, if a school board out there said, yes, we want to help get our kids caught up. Yes, we want to offer the residents and the students of our school district more the opportunity of a summer semester than to take a class or two, this amendment would help them do that. I just appeal to you, members,
This is an opportunity, given COVID pandemic of the past year, given the funding that we did not anticipate to have at the state level. The reduction was supposed to be far greater than it turned out to be, and given the huge wave of federal funding that's coming to us, this is something we ought to do. We ought to think outside the box. We ought to think strategically and allocating this money in the long bill so that school boards out there can make decisions that are good for the parents and the students out there in those communities. That's local control. Ask your aye vote on the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for the comments on local control. Just a reminder, there is also a requirement for thorough and uniform education in our Constitution. Senator Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, I have great news to share. We have already put $100 million into this purpose. If you combine the federal money and the state money that is coming to address the problems that have been mentioned in this amendment, we have significant resources available for our districts to accomplish this. This amendment, if passed, would essentially take $60 million out of the reserve fund that we talked about at the opening of this debate. We're seeing a repeated pattern here of trying to reduce reserves and duplicative money that we've already have available from federal and state sources. So with that, I urge a no vote on amendment number 3.
Senator Lundin.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the debate. I mean, this is a serious policy debate. We're cutting very narrow arguments here. The proposition you just heard was one that said reserve earning less than 1%, holding money in case we need to spend against something, or I would argue, invest in the most important thing with the biggest return possible, helping a student, a young child, pre-3rd grade, learn how to read. That's an interesting juxtaposition. I'm going to vote for the kid every time in this circumstance. There is nothing more leverageable. The return is almost infinite. And we have students right now, specifically our students that come from economic challenge, academic challenge, students who don't look like my children. Those students are the ones who have been most put upon by the pandemic. This is an opportunity to readdress, to reach in. And I would argue if the question truly is $60 million in an already bigger than historical reserve, or $60 million helping students who are demonstrably behind in their learning how to read, I'm going to urge you to vote for those students. Competitive grant program, an efficient way of getting money on that most important, most highly leverageable investment we can make, helping a student learn how to read. I urge your support of L03.
Seeing no further discussion, the question before us is the adoption of L3, or Amendment 3. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no? No. Noes have it. That amendment is lost.
I think it was like 2-2.
Will the clerk please read Amendment 4?
Amendment 4.
Senator Small.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move Amendment 4.
To the amendment.
Yeah, colleagues, thanks for your attention on this. So I've got a number of amendments that I'm proposing today, which is a little out of character for me. Typically, I rely on JBC to do this, but what I've noticed in the bills that we've been passing over the last few sessions is very often we have this focus on safety for our schools, health of our school children, particularly mental and behavioral health for our school children, things like suicide prevention and trying to slow down what we talk about often, things like gun violence. I don't feel, that, colleagues, that these are being adequately addressed in what I've read in the long bill. So what you'll see is a handful of amendments from me that are addressing these. I think a lot of these are stemming from sort of lackluster efforts to screen our students for mental health, for those mental health concerns, to educate our kids about bullying in schools and try to prevent that. to try to bolster the crisis response. We heard a bill yesterday talking about the new 988 suicide prevention number and how important that is. What are we doing to educate people about that? Where's the money for this? And finally, the money that we put through into CDPHE's suicide prevention program. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on Amendment 4, colleagues. It's very easy. Today, we've got a grand total of $1 million put to the Department of Education for the School Bullying Prevention and Education Grant Program. And I'm looking to increase that, particularly as our students get back into the classrooms after really being isolated through COVID. So I'd ask for your support on Amendment 4. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is there any further discussion? Senator Moreno.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate the amendment sponsor. I'm certainly in no way going to advocate against school bullying and prevention and education. That's obviously extremely important. As was stated, there is $1 million going towards this already. Perhaps there is some increased need given the pandemic, as well as for mental health resources. There's a separate amendment on that. We will talk about that more in depth and how it relates to some state stimulus spending. But in the meantime, I will ask for a no vote on this amendment.
Senator Lundin.
Thank you very much. I rise in support of the amendment. You've heard me speak about three priorities over and over and over again: getting people back to jobs, increasing the employer's ability to add jobs, getting students back in class and helping them catch up from the challenges they've got academically, and improving the roads and bridges of Colorado. But I tell you what, in Colorado, we have a mental health crisis as well. And we need to be focusing on that. And there's not a silver bullet on this issue. There just is not. It's going to be many, many different things that happen at many, many different points in a person's life where we can choose to create policies that reach out and support them, help them, encourage them, get them to a better place and into a mentally strong, mentally healthful place. This amendment, it's a simple $2 million ask. $1.7 billion sitting in reserve, the largest in the history of Colorado, 15% against a 30-year average of 3%. $2 million for mental health, students in schools. This one's a no-brainer. I rise in support and urge your support for Amendment 4. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Fields.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members, since many of our students have been learning remotely and dealing with isolation, they're dealing with a high sense of isolation, a sense of depression, maybe anxiety. And when I think about bullying that takes place, I know scenarios in our schools where kids are not able to handle bullying. Sometimes they don't have the intellectual capacity to process what's going on when they're told that they're too poor, or they're too fat, or they're too tall, or they're not rich enough. And so what happens, or you're not pretty enough, whatever the bullying takes place, bullying has gone high tech. And when I think about what we need to do to prevent suicide as it relates to our young people, an investment in bullying prevention, I think, is a good expense.
Seeing no further discussion, the question before us is the adoption of Amendment 4. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The noes have it. That amendment is lost. The clerk, please read Amendment 5.
Go ahead and move it.
Amendment 5.
Senator Liston.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move Amendment 5.
To the amendment.
Thank you. Members, I'm pleased to advocate for Amendment 5. What this does is increase the Medicaid reimbursement rates for the very important tip-of-the-spear EMT services that we all know and need when our loved ones need to get to the hospital, or for clients with disabilities for non-medical transportation, or for people to get for their medical appointments
when loved ones can't take them there. The EMT services, the emergency medical transportation, or ambulances as we know them, include emergency ground and air transportation to and from a hospital, services which are mandatory. These are mandatory services under Colorado's Medicaid program. The EMT services, a lot of people don't realize this, which means the ambulances, they must be fully staffed and manned at all times, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in good times, bad times, rain, snow, sleet, no matter what, they have to be ready. These essential men and women who are great providers for us. And I would just address on the fiscal note, if you'll notice, that this is a mere pittance. It's $270,000, and I figured it out. Of the $50 million that's been set aside for this, that comes to 0.005%. This amendment is a bargain for health, safety, and welfare for all of our people. Thank you.
Senator Zenzinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as you know, EMT services are only reimbursed if a patient is taken to the hospital. So if you fall and you break your arm and somebody calls the ambulance and the medics arrive and they assist you, but they don't actually take you to the hospital, then they don't actually get reimbursed for those services. So the state does not reimburse for health care provided on site, which is often referred to as treat and release. And because of that, that's why we are asking for this very modest targeted adjustment in order to make up for that difference. Ambulances do not refuse anyone, so they end up eating a huge cost when they pick up a Medicaid client, especially in some of the more rural areas of our state. Colorado must support an appropriate level of reimbursement for these high-value services because they are literally our healthcare heroes who save lives every day. They were part of the group of providers that received the common policy adjustment. But what we are asking for today is a targeted adjustment, and this is not uncommon. Every year we look at all of our smattering of providers and we say, how are they doing? What are their costs? What are their expenses? And this is one of those EMT providers here, this Medicaid reimbursement, that needs a targeted adjustment because the impact to their area has been greatly impacted by COVID. So we would ask today that you approve of this amendment. It's a modest 2% increase to the provider rate, and thank you for your vote.
Senator Liston.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, and once again, I would emphasize that these essential, highly trained medical professionals are there for us morning, noon, and night for us, for our loved ones and our relatives, no matter where we are. Think about it. If you're in an accident in some rural part of Colorado or even in town, they are the first people there 99% of the time. They save lives, and this is just a very, very modest increase for their reimbursement rates, which a lot of times doesn't even cover their costs. So members, Senator Zenzinger and I sincerely ask for an aye vote on Amendment 1. Thank you very much.
Senator Moreno.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colleagues, I'm sure I have no disagreement with the purpose of this amendment. But again, just to provide you some further context around this amendment, as was stated, these providers are part of the common policy, so they will be receiving a 2.5% provider rate increase. In addition to those common policy adjustments, in fiscal year 1920, these rates were also increased. $6.8 million total funds, $1.8 million general fund. That built upon a 6.6% increase in FY 18-19, 7% in FY 17-18, plus there was also this mechanism that we utilize called certified public expenditures. So EMT providers that are public entities can now submit certified public expenditures and have a federal match for the services that they provide. That amounts to about $33 million in fiscal year 21-22. Not disputing the need in any way, but just providing some additional context for this amendment.
Senator Zenzinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Those targeted rate increases that occurred in prior years were actually as a result of some dramatic defunding that came at the federal level. So at that time, we were not actually increasing state funding, we were backfilling some of the federal funding that had been cut. So we didn't actually benefit from the targeted increase because it ended up being kind of a net zero at the end of the day. So again, I would just highly encourage a yes vote, and thank you for your time.
Seeing no further discussion, the question before us is the adoption of Amendment 5. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. Noes have it. That amendment is lost. Will the clerk please read Amendment 6?
Aye.
Amendment 6.
Senator Liston.
Members, we're going to save you some pain and agony. We will kindly withdraw Amendment 6.
Amendment 6 is withdrawn. Will the clerk please read Amendment 7?
Amendment 7, J009 to Senate Bill 205. Amendment print to bill, page 115, line 11 of the total.
Go ahead, Senator Janol. Senator Janol.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Amendment 7 deals with the developmental disabilities waiver that's designed to serve people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And this comes on a personal note for me, always trying to make sure that the wait list has gone down significantly and someday in the near future will be gone totally. But this is the only waiver that needs 24/7 support, and it's the only waiver that still has a waiting list out of 22 Medicaid waivers that are out there. And unfortunately, despite that intensive level of care needed by the people on this waiting list, it continues to grow today to totals of over 3,000 people. We've made progress. We kind of lost a little bit of progress and lost a little bit of ground last year. There would have been a bill that would have helped to solve the wait list problem once and for all, but it didn't have a chance because of COVID. What this amendment does is it doubles the IDD enrollment. In other words, what JBC did this year was ask for 667 folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities to get that help. I asked if we could eliminate the wait list due to COVID and so many people needing help, but that wasn't. In talking with JBC, I realized that there is a plan in place to try to eliminate this wait list by 2024. What this amendment would do is it would double the amount of people that would get help. It would double it to 1,324, taking those off the wait list. So basically cutting it in half. But in speaking with JBC, I realized that there are plans in place, and I feel good about that. And I am withdrawing Amendment 7 with the realization that this wait list will go away in 2024. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Janol. Amendment 7 is withdrawn. Will the clerk please read Amendment 8?
Amendment 8.
Senator Priola.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move Amendment 8, also known as J021.
To the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, this amendment restores $1 million to the screening, brief intervention, and relief and treatment, otherwise known as SBIRT. The JVC omitted restoring the money that was swept last year. This is a good use of funds that will educate folks on spotting addiction early and save money for health care and people being addicted in the long run. I ask for an aye vote.
Is there any further discussion? Senator Moreno.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just really quick on this one, there was a budget request to completely eliminate the SBIRT program. The JBC did deny that request, so they maintained their $500,000 appropriation, but it does not restore to where they were at. So just some further context for your consideration.
Seeing no further discussion, the question before us is the adoption of Amendment 8. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Ayes have it. That amendment is adopted. Will the clerk please read Amendment 9?
Amendment 9.
Senator Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move Amendment 9.
To the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Amendment 9 requests $160,000 for a new Chief Educational Equity Officer position. The new CEEO will serve as a facilitator and guide in the next phase of deep learning in all aspects across the state as we engage with all stakeholders and constituencies in the post-secondary ecosystem in Colorado to close educational equity gaps towards our goal of 66% post-secondary degree and credential attainment by 2025. I ask for your support.
Senator Moreno.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just again, some more context for your decision making on this one. This was a budget request that was submitted in fiscal year 2020, 2021. It was pulled back because of the pandemic and the effects on the budget, and we just couldn't fund this position then. Subsequently, a budget amendment was, a budget request was not asked for in this year. So clearly, we are focused on equity efforts in higher education. This position probably would help advance those efforts.
Senator Zenzinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know if you were paying attention during our SMART Act hearings, but you might have heard from all of the departments this year that as part of their SMART Act goals, they had a diversity, equity, and inclusion goal. Every department in the state had one of those goals. The goal for the Department of Higher Ed in particular is woven into the Colorado Master Plan. It's just common sense that if you actually want to achieve your goals, you need to be able to put the right resources into supporting those goals. And so I highly encourage an aye vote on this amendment.
Seeing no further discussion, the question before us is the adoption of Amendment 9. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. That amendment is adopted. The enthusiasm in here, folks. Will the clerk please read Amendment 10?
Amendment 10.
Senator Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move Amendment 10.
To the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment will add $1.44849 million to the TGYS grant program, which will restore pre-COVID funding to ensure the most qualified grantees can deliver services to youth and families members. The Tony Gramsci's Youth Services Program was formed to provide prevention and intervention for our students, education for our children, our youth, and our families. And they definitely need this support. 86 programs from 98 organizations who are anticipated to serve approximately 50,000 Colorado children, youth, and families during COVID could benefit from this support. And 52% of schools identified